What's going on, guys? I am very excited to announce that Philly Sports Trips is now the official travel partner of the You Know Ball podcast. The biggest reason why I've partnered with Philly Sports Trips is really simple. I give them my money. I have a mini vacation that involves the Sixers, Eagles, and Phillies, and I don't have to lift a finger to plan anything. I can party as light as I want or as hard as I want, and Philly Sports Trips takes care of everything that I hate. The planning, the organizing, researching where to go, and I get a 5-star hotel, non-crazy flight schedules, and tailgates that have unbelievable food and booze, and most importantly, it's a douchebag-free zone. These are just some of the many reasons that I am excited to partner with Philly Sports Trips. I can't wait to go on a Sixers trip next season, and Uniball is absolutely going on the road to at least one Eagles game. So let me know which Eagles game you would want to go to, and I would love to do a huge Uniball road trip. Out of all the cities, I'm thinking New York or Chicago, but I want to know what you guys think as well. So tweet at me at TrailBroDude, DM me, comment on the YouTube, and let me know which Eagles game you guys think we should go as a group this season. Phillies and Eagles trips are booking right now. So head over to phillysportstrips.com and let them know that You Know Ball sent you for two very important reasons. Not only does it help fund the podcast, but we'll have VIP events and goodies specifically just for You Know Ball listeners. phillysportstrips.com, premium travel for every Philly sports fan, and a proud sponsor of the You Know Ball podcast. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the You Know Ball podcast. I am excited to have back onto the podcast for, I believe, the fourth or fifth time now, Bryan Toporek from Bleacher Report and Forbes. And Bryan, how are you enjoying this offseason so far? No Sixers basketball around to ruin our lives. Just a bunch of slop and rumors that we're going to discuss pretty much run down today. So how are you enjoying this time without the Sixers where we can just dream about the team?
Yeah, this is the most fun time to be a Sixers fan when it's all conceptual before they actually put anything on the court, and then you realize how much you hate the actual on-court product. But no, it's been busy. It's been good. I've had a lot of stuff out at Forbes Sports already. I'm going to keep pumping the stuff out, throughout the offseason, heading into free agency. The draft, maybe we have to care about the draft. We'll find out in a week or so.
Yeah.
So
now
yeah.
The new rumors. Yeah, that's.
I know. Lots of slop. I do love slop season.
Yeah, I actually didn't even have that on my list, but we could just discuss that off top. If people didn't see the thing that we implied last week on the episode with Marty was it would be smart for the Nets to defer the pick to 2023 so that it was a weird thing. It's very rare that you get this, like, you can sometimes get the pick in 2022, but you can also defer to 2023. And what it seems like is that the Nets are about to come to the decision that they are going to defer the pick on the chances that the Sixers, who already have some drama that we will get to in a little bit, already have some turmoil, could potentially fall apart. And next year's a better draft. It's a deeper draft. If the pick falls lower than 23, oh well, you might get a similar level prospect anyway. And if the pick is higher, then if you're the Nets and you're going for these win now moves, my thought on that was that they called around the league and they basically said, we have the Sixers pick, like, would you be interested? And the majority of the league was like the 23rd pick in the draft, like the end of the first round. Most guys that get traded for those picks nowadays, like straight up one-on-one, are like the Landry Shamits of the world. Like Landry Shamit has now been traded twice for a late first round pick. Other than that, it's like Aaron Holiday's another guy. That was like a move up. Like, it's pretty rare that you're going to get a quality rotation guy for a late first round pick. And I think the Nets have realized that, and now they've deferred it to next year, thinking that they're going to have more ammo going into, potentially after this draft, trading the future pick, or at the next trade deadline, which I do think is the smart move from their perspective.
Right. It just gives them more flexibility. Like, they have their own giant offseason decisions to make with Kyrie Irving and Ben Simmons in particular. So, like, if they bring everyone back and then realize at the trade deadline next year, this isn't working, we need to make a major change, it's better to actually have this mystery box pick from the Sixers, which is fully unprotected, versus, 23 now, which will be a prospect. And then, as soon as you drive that car off the lot, it loses 50% of its value.
Exactly. That's the big thing, is that like all of these picks, the mystery box element of it could be anything, is very appealing to teams. And the second that you make the pick, it's not as valuable, all of that. And then from the Sixers perspective, I mean, I personally love it because it gives me something to talk about during draft season.
Right.
If they traded the pick, I would have been like, oh, great, I'm scouting for the fucking New Orleans Pelicans. Like, who cares? But like, I do think that it is a good thing, and it's something that we'll get into a little bit later about the pick and whether they'll keep it or whether they'll end up moving it in a salary dump, or they will end up trading it just for a veteran in general. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about the Doc Rivers news, which has come out, which we've got it from both angles now. So we have Mark Stein coming out and saying the Lakers are still holding out hope that Doc Rivers, they have their list of candidates. They have like Kenny Atkinson, Darvin Ham. They have like a handful of guys that they've been talking to for their job. And it does sound like LeBron really wants Ham. Like that's like his guy right now. But they're still holding out hope. And the Sixers company line, what they've been saying, what Jake Fisher has said, what Kyle Neubeck has said, what Paul Hudrick has said, is basically they're not letting Doc go. And I'm not sure if I believe it. I think ultimately it kind of comes down to what Doc wants to do. Because if Doc is willing to walk away, because his contract right now, like he's got MLE money, dude. Like for a coach, like he's got nice
Tim Connolly money.
The
exact same amount of money.
Yeah. So he makes $8 million a year, and he'd have to walk away, go to California, which, as Jake Fisher pointed out, he loves the golf's year round. It's funny, like the priorities, like the reasons why he's taking the job, like, he loves the golf, why he would take the Lakers job. He loves, he's got friends at restaurants and stuff. It's just really funny, like not to coach LeBron James and Anthony Davis.
Sure. But Russell Westbrook too. You get all three, the big three.
Probably going to get stuck with him at this point. But I'm not sure if I do believe the rumors that came out. I'm not sure if I believe if the Sixers are bluffing. I kind of think that they are going to keep Doc, because I think there's two elements to it. One is they don't want this constant turnover, because I don't know how Morey feels about Doc. I can assume Paul Hudrick said their relationship's great. I highly doubt that, just based on the comments and just their approach to how they want to, play the game of basketball, basically. They're very different stylistically. I think it seems like there's been a little bit of conflict between those two. But my whole point on this is that, like, I think that they want to keep him because I think Embiid probably likes him and they want to keep Embiid happy. And then they also don't want another coach, another reason for Embiid to get unhappy or to have some just always this craziness. And then there's the money element of it too. So I don't know how you feel, but I'm kind of like, I think that there are multiple reasons why the team wants to keep him, even though I don't want that at all.
Right. I mean, I think the money is the biggest factor.
For sure.
I think if Doc came to them and like asked out of his contract, said like, I will not take the remaining 3 years and $24 million. Just let me go have this Lakers job. They would be more amenable to that, but they don't. I want to
go get the veterans minimum in LA.
Right. I just don't think they want to fire him, eat the remainder of his contract. I'm sure if the Lakers hired him, there might be some set off, so they wouldn't have to swallow all of it. But I don't think they want to pay Tim, 8 figures to go coach another team for the next 3 years. And part of it may be them just playing a game of chicken with the Lakers and saying like, we know you really want him, give up something. Like the 27, 29 first round pick, you're probably not getting that because they might have to include that for Russell Westbrook. But like even a second rounder at this point, just throw us a little bit of bone, throw us some cash, whatever. Like just give something, and then we'll be more amenable to like trading him to you instead of just outright firing him.
Exactly. And also a few people have brought this up to me. Like, I didn't even know that coaches could get traded. I think Jason Kidd was the last one that got traded from, if I remember correctly, Jason Kidd get traded? I feel like he did.
Doc got traded to the Clippers.
I know Doc got traded because Doc
yeah.
got traded for a first-round pick, which is
right.
fucking insane to think about. Like,
well, where the Clippers were at the time and like where Doc was at the time, coming off the Boston run, he was thought of much more highly than he is now. But yeah,
I mean, I just think trading a first-round pick for a coach is pretty insane in itself. Like, I mean, it's like, because like, do you really have to do that? Like the history says you don't. Like, you could either find a guy, or like maybe if you're getting like Spo or something, like someone who will legitimately change your life on the court and off the court. But Spo and like there's like a handful of guys that are kind of like one of one. And I just don't really think that, and I'm just talking about like throughout NBA history. Like, I don't really think there are a ton of coaches that are like worth trading legitimate assets for team building. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. But kind of going back to the like are they holding them? Like, it's possible they are. It's possible they're just playing mind games, whatever. But I do think that the likelihood is that Doc is coaching the Sixers next year, just because it's like, I mean, at this point, the Lakers are going into their final interviews with candidates. We have the offseason is in full force. Like, they've already, like, the Sixers would be unless the plan is we have a guy in waiting. We have 2 or 3 guys, like, because the Mike D'Antoni stuff was weird, where like he was the front runner for the Charlotte job, and then all of a sudden he just wasn't. And it's like, that happened last time with the Sixers, where like he was the front runner for the Sixers job, and then out of nowhere Doc gets hired. And like, the Lakers holding on this long, like, it's been how many weeks? 6 weeks since they fired Frank Vogel. Like, that's the only thing that makes me think there could be a small possibility that this could still happen. And then maybe the Sixers just go, okay, we'll just promote Sam Cassell, or we'll just hire Will Weaver or Mike D'Antoni or one of these guys we have in our back pocket in order to kind of be the guy that fills in for Doc. But like, if you're this far into it and you have, and it hasn't happened yet, I do think that there's just like too good of a chance that Doc does come back. And I the only thing I'm holding out hope for is that the Lakers are taking it to the last possible second, saying like, all right, well, we'll see if they'll really, but like, once again, ultimately it comes down to like Doc going to the team and them coming to a mutual decision too. So I don't know. I've kind of given up on that dream. I wish that I hope it does happen, but I'm very skeptical at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of the voices from the Sixers side have been conveying, like, we are fine keeping Doc through next year. So I think when there is that much, a unanimous consent in that regard, like, you just have to take it at face value. So I think they would be fine with it. Again, like, they don't want to pay him $24 million not to coach for them for the next 3 years. But I think if they do bring him back, they need to be more mindful of who he is as a coach. And it like the scene that comes to mind from Moneyball, when Brad Pitt is just he's like, all right, don't play these players, and manager's like, nope, I'm gonna play these guys. Like, all right, fuck you, he's traded, he's gone. Like, don't sign DeAndre Jordan, because you know what's going to happen if you sign DeAndre Jordan. Like, leave Doc with potential weak spots in the roster if you need to, or at least like areas of legitimate question, and make him figure it out. Like, there is them wasting an entire month after the trade deadline with Paul Millsap and DeAndre Jordan instead of getting Paul Reed and Charles Bassey minutes at the center spot. As it turned out, that would have been pretty helpful to find out what those guys could bring, or like how much you can count on them in the playoffs. And instead, Paul Reed goes in basically cold turkey. So if they do bring Doc back, I think Daryl needs to be more mindful of, like, we know who Doc is as a coach. We know his tendencies. He's going to favor washed veterans. So don't give him that option
at all. Don't bring any aboard. Like, seriously, like, I'd rather have you using the end of the bench spots, any of the roster spots you're going to have open for guys that have some upside, whatever, something that we can figure out throughout the course of a season. Because as you said, like, we've proven time and time again, like, you give Doc his veterans. And another thing that is just really frustrating about the Doc experience is, like, it's not only like, okay, we wasted our time with Millsap and Jordan because Morey went out and got those guys. Like, what's the most frustrating part to me is that, like, we're in the second straight year in the second round, and Doc is still trying to figure out lineups.
Yeah.
Like, it happened in the Hawks series. It happened in the Heat series. And, like, look, Joel Embiid wasn't 100%. And we probably would have lost that series anyway just because Joel Embiid wasn't 100%. But, like, what it comes down to me is, like, sitting down with him and figuring out those things throughout the course of the season so that you're not trying to figure it out in May and potentially into June if they ever go that far, and you know what your team looks like in the playoffs, and you're giving Doc the pieces that he needs, and you're working with him, and not like that. When I talk about like this weird tension, like, it's clear Daryl Morey wanted him to play the younger guys more, but then he went and he signed DeAndre Jordan. Like,
right.
Like,
it's like, well, if you're not going to you're not going to play the younger guys, we got to do something, I guess. We can't literally leave you with no backup. Like, who are you going to play? George Niang at the 5?
Yeah, that was
probably
that's what he would have done. 100%.
Right.
He would have, yeah.
Right. Or I mean, he would have just stuck with Millsap, and Millsap was just like so badly not equipped to play that role that I guess, like, in theory, at least Jordan had the size, even though, you know, he literally can't move at this point of his career. But yeah, like, don't go out and sign Trevor Ariza on a min deal. Like, I don't care. Trevor Ariza might be a good positional fit for what they need, but I don't want to see him play 25 minutes a game for this team next year. Nope. Absolutely not.
He's 36.
Take someone younger. I don't care if they have less of a track record. Like, as you said, let's figure out what they can provide. And if they're not the answer, you got the trade deadline, you got buyouts. Like, you have ways to adjust your roster throughout the season.
Exactly. So, speaking of people who might not be on the Sixers next year, so we know what's going on with the Doc stuff. I would lean that he stays at this point. I think Rich Hoffman from the Athletic and Sixers beat said it was like 60-40. He thinks Doc stays. I'd probably have 60-40, maybe 65-35, somewhere in that range. Another person that we can discuss is someone that you're writing an article about right now, which is Tobias Harris, who has been, I don't know how to put this, been a controversial figure in his time with the Sixers for, you know, the fact that he was overpaid, all that stuff. We all know about Tobias and his relationship with the fans, which became much better over the course of time and actually was seemingly good the last 2 or 3 months that he was with the team. But I'm starting to think about what this offseason looks like and whether Tobias is on the team or not next year, because that will define a lot about this offseason, mostly because the Sixers have no real tradable salaries. And if you're not moving Tobias, then it's hard to get legitimate talent back in that makes a good amount of money, because most good players do. So what were some trade ideas that you had in mind? What were some teams that you were looking at for Tobias? And do you think he gets traded this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, I think the whole reason I'm writing about him is going back to the star hunting premise that you and Marty talked about, you know, that Wendy mentioned. And like, if they are really star hunting, they have to trade Tobias. Like, there is no way for them to, you know, either if it's a sign and trade, they don't have the salaries to match. If they're trying to create cap space, they're not going to have cap space unless they trade him. So that was like the premise of why I'm even considering these in the first place. But as you said, like, there aren't a ton of like really obvious deals that jump out that would benefit both sides here. So like, you know, OKC, if they're going the cap space route, like, let's say, you know, they think they have a legitimate shot at Zach Lavine, or like, frankly, they better know they're getting Zach Lavine or someone else, because you don't make this trade.
The Sixers, to clarify, not Oklahoma City.
Right. Yeah. The Sixers. Like, they need to know July 1st, this guy is definitely signing, because you don't just like salary dump Tobias Harris without having that type of a guarantee. But OKC is the first team, just because they're the only team with cap space right now. They can get north of 30 million. They have 22 right now, but they have like 9.6 in just cap holds. And it's for guys like Raymond Felton and Nick Collison and Norris Cole are all still on their books. So if they wipe all those guys off, they can get up to 30 million. So you can do something like Tobias for, you know, Derek Favors is their biggest salary at $9.7 million. The Sixers could also attach Thybulle, or if the Nets do defer this pick, they could trade number 23 on draft night. So I think for any trade that we're talking about with Tobias, Thybulle, and the 23 pick are the two big trade chips that you're considering here. Again, like, unless you know you're getting someone back, if you make this trade, you're getting Favors. Okay, sure. Maybe you play him at backup center, knowing Doc.
Oh, great. Here we go.
You definitely play a backup center. But then you have no forwards on the roster. Like, George Niang is the only forward. And if you're signing Zach Lavine, then you've only got the room mid-level, which is like $5 million, and min deals to round out the roster. So I'm not in love with that idea. I think,
especially because you'd have to make that trade now. Like, similar to the Kemba Walker, Al Horford deal that Oklahoma City and Boston did during the playoffs last year. Oklahoma City isn't going to have all this cap space this offseason. Like, they are going, this is right now we're speaking about. This would be a move that you would have to make now. And once again, like, even if you feel confident that you could get a guy like Lavine, he could change his mind. Maybe Chicago, maybe they're just holding out for Chicago to give that 5th year fully guaranteed max. And then he's like, all right, well, now I'm staying in Chicago. And your plan is what exactly? Like that is the risk that happens here, especially because they really do lack. And that's the problem, is that it's not like, as much as Tobias makes a ton of money and like, it's easy to just say like, oh, we'll just trade him. Like, well, yes, he's going to be very hard to trade. And also he serves a very important purpose in that he is a large man who can dribble a basketball and shoot and kind of defend. And the Sixers have like none of those on the roster right now.
I mean, he is their best healthy two-way forward, which speaks volume about the rest of their forward depth chart. Yes. But, to his credit, he did play better on defense in the playoffs. And, Rich Hoffman of The Athletic wrote a great piece about him, I thought, during the playoffs, about how like the Harden trade kind of enabled him to focus more on that area of the court, because he's like not, he doesn't have to create shots for himself. He doesn't have to post up 10 times a game anymore. So he has more energy to devote there. So like overall, I'm of the mind of keeping him. And like all of this, everything that we discussed with the Sixers offseason, everything you discussed with every other guest, it all starts with James Harden. Like if James Harden picks up the player option, there is a domino effect. Or if he opts out and re-signs the less, then there's another domino effect. Because if he picks up the player option, it's going to be like they have to salary dump someone else, maybe Korkmaz probably, to get enough room under the apron to have a full non-taxpayer mid-level, which is $10.3 million, and the biannual exception, which is 4.1. Even if he takes like 42, you can get to full non-taxpayer, full biannual, keep Tobias on the roster. Like all of this assumes you waive Danny Green, because you're not paying $10 million for a guy who's not going to play next year. So it all depends on what Harden does. But if he takes less, I'm leaning toward just keep Tobias, use the mid-level on either one forward or two, one wing/forward, two wing/forwards, using the biannual on another one, and like just pray to God you can get enough guys between 6'6" and 6'8" who they don't even have to dribble, just shoot and defend. That's all you need to do.
And on top of that, you get to keep your first round pick, because that's a big part of it too. Or maybe you use that first round pick in another trade with Thybulle and Korkmaz in order to get back yet another rotational wing or rotational whatever. Because I do think that the Sixers' major problem in this playoffs, other than the fact that Joel Embiid was hurt and James Harden was not James Harden, was the fact that they just didn't have anyone they could play. Like Shake Milton should not be in a playoff rotation, and he was like our fifth or sixth best player, depending on Paul Reed or whatever. You need to give yourself as many options as possible to hit on those rotation players. So with the Tobias thing, it's hard because it's like, if you send him out, like we can go through some of your like teams that you had like thoughts on for trades, but like if you send him out, what you're getting back isn't going to be great. And like someone brought up to me, Francis Zomes from Twitter, who's a great follow, and we talk about the Sixers a lot. Like I had brought up, like, I mean, I wouldn't even want to do like Tobias Harris in the 23rd pick for Eric Gordon, because like, and that's not even legal. Like Houston would have to send out even more money, like Christian Wood or David Nwaba, and some smaller salaries. Like even that gets a little bit complicated, but like, I wouldn't want to do something like that. And I don't even know if Houston would do it. And the reason I don't want to do something like that is like, because once again, it doesn't solve our issues. Like Gordon's not going to start with this starting five. Like he would be a very undersized 3. Like, yes, he can kind of play the 3, but you're not going to start him at the 3. He's old. He's kind of slow and not as athletic as he once was. And then on top of that, he's injured all the time. So like you're getting rid of, like, as much as Tobias drives us crazy, like he doesn't miss a lot of games. He can start at the 4. Like there are the outlets to getting multiple good rotation players are probably easier if you keep Tobias on the team than they are if you trade him and you use all of your assets to get off the contract. So unless you have that clear route to a star, and even that's a little bit murky, or if you have like multiple free agents you're eyeing, or guys that could be just like salary dump to you that you like, then maybe, okay, we can talk. Like maybe it's a little bit of addition by subtraction, because you get in guys that fit better, and you get in guys that are kind of like more tradable salaries and more movable in case you need more flexibility and stuff like that. But what were some teams that you were thinking of for Tobias, just with these trades in general? And then we can talk over some ideas.
Yeah. So I thought basically what they need to do if they are going to trade him, and it's not to create cap space, it's almost like what Dallas did with Kristaps Porzingis at the trade deadline. Break up one overpaid guy for 2 smaller contracts, both of whom are also probably overpaid or undesirable or whatever. So Dallas is one that came to mind. I'm just looking at teams that have, multiple guys in that like $10 to $20 million range. Is it like Bertans and Tim Hardaway Jr. for Tobias and 23, or Tobias and Thybulle? Like, I don't think they're giving up Dorian Finney-Smith. Maybe it's Tim Hardaway Jr. and Dwight Powell for Tobias and 23. Again, like none of these I love. None of, as you said, they are just creating more problems. Like ultimately, I think every resource the Sixers have this summer should be devoted almost strictly to wings and forwards. So like it's taking one away for another like shooting guard and another center, or another, Bertans, who is just going to be a layup line in the playoffs. I don't think that's making you better, but that is one team that at least like stood out as, okay, maybe, Luka needs a new number 2. Like, I guess Tobias could be that guy for
sure, why not?
Sure.
Him and Dinwiddie can both fake it. Although if they bring back Brunson, Brunson's obviously the best of that trio. But it does feel as though like it's and like we talked about this last week, and it feels like the Tim Hardaway Jr. thing is an easy one to go to. And like when healthy, Tim Hardaway Jr. is a starter level player in the NBA. I'm not saying he's not. He's not going to start on the Sixers. Like he would be the 6th man. And now you have 2 holes in your starting lineup, and Bertans is not good enough defensively, especially because we really need to focus on guys who can survive offensively and shine defensively. That getting those guys would be the complete opposite of that problem. So like, unless you're completely leaning in on the idea of that the Sixers are just going to have a ton of shooting and ball handling around James Harden, Joel Embiid, and Tyrese Maxey, and we're going to be this unstoppable offense, that's probably sustainable for the regular season. I don't think it's sustainable in the playoffs. And the one thing that this playoffs and the past few playoffs has taught me is like, you just need 2-way guys. Like I put it like this the other day. Like I would rather have Gary Harris than Duncan Robinson. Like, because Duncan Robinson, as he has shown, is not going to be super effective in the playoffs. Like, Gary Harris isn't going to shine on either end necessarily, but he's just going to be solid enough on both ends, which is why guys like, I know Reggie Bullock's been struggling, but like Reggie Bullock was very good for the Mavericks up until this series. Dorian Finney-Smith was fantastic. Like just getting guys who are very good on one side of the court and can survive on the other side of the court. Whereas a trade like this is like just once again kind of leaning into that one-dimensional element of the Sixers and having Joel Embiid as your only even like remotely plus defender other than Matisse Thybulle, if he's not included in the trade, who, as we have shown, cannot play in the playoffs because of his offense.
Right. I mean, I think the one luxury, for as much as people are like burying James Harden right now, and I think a lot of that is just related to his contract. Like if we find out that he's taking way less than the max, I think there's going to be a lot less consternation in general about the James Harden future in Philadelphia. Between him, Embiid, and Maxey, like the Sixers, it'd be great if they could get a wing who could create his own shot, because those players are extremely valuable. It'd be very, very hard to do so unless, like, by some miracle of God, that player falls to 23, or like that player has been oft injured and is available for the mid-level exception. But sure. I think because they have Embiid, who is going to command frequent double teams, he's one of the only centers in the NBA who's going to do that. And Harden, despite all of his flaws, is still commanding a bunch of defensive attention, and he can create offense for others and himself. Maxey is improving in that regard as well. Like, they don't need wings who can, do everything. It's literally just, can you defend? Can you shoot? If you can stay on the court. And Danny Green's just going to be parked in the corner. All he's going to do, we are not asking him to dribble. We do not want you to dribble. Just literally stand there and hit open shots and play good defense. So they do have a luxury in roster building this offseason in that regard. And again, it goes back to another team I thought of with these, again, like $10 to $20 million contracts. The New York Knicks have a bunch of them. So Evan Fournier, Alec Burks, Nerlens Noel, Kemba Walker, Cam Reddish, take your pick of like 2 or 3 of them to fill however much salary you need. But yeah, none of those guys do anything for me because they're all either one-way guys or they're not going to be playable in the playoffs.
Right. And that's what the Sixers really need to focus on is we know they're going to be in the regular season if they have James Harden and Joel Embiid. We don't need to worry about that. If those two are relatively healthy, you're at worst a 4 or 5 seed. You'll be fine. You can figure out the rest. It's the playoffs we need to worry about. And because of the fact that there are a bunch of flawed players, one-way players, older players, guys that could eat, Kemba fell off a cliff in the last 2 years. There's just not a ton of options out there. The Pacers were an idea that you had brought up to me, which was and I know the Buddy Hield thing, people love Buddy Hield. And I do think that Buddy Hield could have value on some teams, especially a team like the Sixers that just need shooters. But once again, he cannot survive defensively in the playoffs. And unless you're just we're going to figure out a way to get a 3 or 4 that is absolute stopper. Even then, I just don't see a world in which Buddy Hield could exist on this version of the Sixers and be a useful player because the defense would just be so bad. And Bojan Bogdanovic is another one who very good offensively would be an ideal kind of fit. But once again, the defense just is not going to work. There's a ton of teams out there. There's a ton of options out there. And unless something falls in their laps where it's Atlanta's desperate to get off John Collins and the Sixers are that's an example where you can find a team for Tobias, or Atlanta wants to take back Tobias, which I don't think they would. But that's an example where if they're not getting good offers for John Collins and they just want picks and young players, you can create a package of some prospects, and whether it's Springer and Thybulle and a first, and then send the Tobias deal somewhere else or whatever, try to figure that out. They only have 1 first to trade once again, so it is a little bit hard. But that's the only scenario in which I would be yeah, we can trade Tobias and we can get back a player who's just as good, if not better than Tobias, a better fit, and fills a ton of needs for this team. But it just does feel very far-fetched right now.
Right. Yeah. Sacramento was another one that came up to mind. And this is mostly just praying that Sacramento is dumb, which
historically speaking is a very good bet. I mean, even this year.
Right. And now we're hearing they want to win or they want to move into win now mode. And they're expecting this Timberwolves-esque surge up the standings. Well, you want to complete your big 3 with Fox and Sabonis and Tobias Harris? Be our guest. The tricky thing for them is, once July 1st hits, because Harrison Barnes' deal is descending, Barnes and Holmes are their 2 best salary matching contracts. But after July 1st, the trade wouldn't be legal. So you'd have to do Barnes and Holmes for Tobias and whatever sweeteners you want to throw in, Thybulle 23, whatever. That I would be at least open to.
Of course, but like they didn't even want. They only were willing to take on Tobias in the Ben trade because they would get Ben.
Right.
Like that is the thing. Is like if I were the Kings, I mean, and once again, the Kings are the Kings. So who knows? Who knows? But if I were the Kings, I would say we have Tobias Harris for half the money.
Yeah.
That's how Tobias played. And like Barnes might even be a little bit better just because he's kind of more flexible than Tobias. Like he can play the 3 and the 4 more regularly. He's a little bit more of a willing shooter. He's a better defender on ball. Like I think that like if you're built and like apparently like Sacramento. So like might just be like there's no way we can trade Harrison Barnes because although Halliburton, I don't know. I know.
See,
like, Halliburton like Sacramento, and they didn't want to do it and whatever. I mean, maybe if Harrison Barnes goes to them and says, "I want to trade," and they really like Thybulle because Thybulle turns into prime Scottie Pippen against the Kings and puts De'Aaron Fox in the 7th level of hell whenever they play. That they say, "Okay, well, we want Thybulle and whatever." And once again, like they could probably just trade Holmes and Barnes in 2 separate trades and get back more. So like,
yes.
They probably won't do anything like this, especially because up until that big splash move they made for Sabonis, they've actually been very quiet during Monty McNair's tenure. Like they don't make a ton of trades. Like they've only had like a handful of trades and they're usually smaller moves. So I doubt that that's an option. But that's another scenario. Like Harrison Barnes, John Collins, guys in that range would be like the dream scenario in a Tobias Harris trade. It just doesn't really seem like it's going to happen.
Right. Yeah. This would be preying purely on King's stupidity. Like they should not make this move, but like I could see them talking themselves into like, all right, what if we start De'Aaron Fox and either Davion Mitchell, or let's say we get Jaden Ivey at number 4, then Thybulle and Tobias and Sabonis. Like that's a playoff lineup. Like it's not at all, but
there's literally no shooting.
Right. Well, compared to the slop that they've been throwing out over the last 5 years, maybe that does sound better. But you're absolutely right. If they are willing to move off of Barnes and Holmes, which at this point, who knows? Like I think they would be pursuing like win now guys apparently instead of Barnes is in the last year of his deal. So if they aren't sure they're going to be able to retain him, like they should be considering moving him, but. Like, I think they could pretty easily get at least a mid-first round pick for him. Like, a lot of contenders should be interested because, as you said, he's Tobias Harris on a reasonable contract.
Exactly. So, moving on from the Tobias stuff, because I just think that, like, there's a handful of teams that we could maybe come up with, like, trades for. I don't see any of them as actually realistic. I think their best case scenario, the fact that they can only trade 1 first really fucking hurts. Because I forgot they traded 27. Because I was like, well, they could trade this and then they could trade the one that's really far out. And I'm like, oh, wait, no, they can't trade 27 or 28 or 26 or 25 or 24. Like, it's literally like you can only trade this year's, and if the Nets choose to keep this year's pick, then you can only trade next year's, and it's after the draft. So
and fully unprotected, or you would have to renegotiate with OKC at 25, and that it would be a mess. You could do pick swaps if I don't think that's gonna be huge value, but like I mean, frankly, I would probably bet on some like late 2020s pick swaps from the Sixers.
True. That's actually not a bad point, actually, now that you think about it. But we're not going to get into that because I don't want to be sad. But so I thought that maybe if there was a team that had cap space or like just like a really bad contract that we could take back, and then maybe we get a pick or something, it could work. But like you can't take that risk with James Harden and with the way that like you don't know how happy Joel Embiid is going to be here in Philadelphia for how long. So you gotta be very careful with these moves that you make this offseason. But moving on to someone who might be a little bit more tradable, I actually think definitely more tradable because I have to constantly remind myself that the whole world doesn't view Matisse Thybulle the way that I do, which is that I think that he's overrated, and I think that he can't play in the playoffs, and all of the things. All of that said, he just made a second straight second team all defense. So clearly there are people out there that think highly of him, even if he is still a bench player mostly. And, his rookie contract's almost over and all that stuff. I think that there is this new rumor that came out. The Bulls, Mark Eversley, apparently was infatuated with Thybulle to the point where he was a big part of the reason why they drafted him in 2019 when he was here with the Philadelphia front office. And now he is in Chicago, and they would attempt to get Thybulle in a trade, essentially. And I do think that there's probably some truth to that. I'm sure that I think Chicago, their mindset has essentially been, let's put defense around our 2 or 3 main guys because they can't play defense, which is not the worst strategy in the world when you have Vooch and Lavine and DeRozan, and put, the Alex Carusos, the Lonzo Balls around them and try to figure out a way to kind of patch together a defense. I don't know. I look at Chicago's roster, though, and I struggle to see who they would be willing to give up, because originally the report came out and said this would be kind of like a salary thing where, like, the Sixers are trying to save on tax. They would basically, like, maybe just be looking for picks or whatever, send Thybulle there, and then you don't have to worry about the salary and you can go from there. But Kyle Neubeck came out and said, no, if they're trading Thybulle, they're getting a rotation player. Like, they want to improve the team, which makes sense. He's one of their only tradable salaries, making like $5 million next year. So if they were to make a trade with Chicago, like, what would that even look like? Because, like, once again, my opinion on Thybulle is very low. Maybe theirs isn't. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah. The tricky thing with Thybulle, if you're not attaching him with Tobias or anyone else, frankly, he's only earning $4.4 million next year. So you basically, like, have to package him with someone else to get back at any salary of value. Like,
well, Korkmaz plays like Larry Bird against the Bulls, so we have the best teams to trade with are the guys that they go off against. So
that's possible. The other tricky thing with Chicago in particular is, they don't have a ton of, like, they're not moving DeRozan, Vooch, Ball, Caruso, Pat Williams for Thybulle. Like, Kobe White is their most tradable asset at $7.4 million, which would be legal, but, like, Kobe White, again, you're trading as much as you might hate Thybulle and think he's unplayable in the playoffs, like, you're trading one of your only wings for another inconsistent guard. Like, you've already got Shake Milton, and, like, frankly, you're gonna play Maxey and Harden 40 plus minutes in the playoffs if both of those guys are healthy anyway. So, like, Kobe White doesn't really address a need for you and makes you weaker at the one position of actual needs. So I don't get that one. Like, maybe a Derek Jones Jr. sign and trade would be the better option. But even still, like, he has to sign for a pretty insignificant amount of money to make that work.
Well, I don't really think Derek Jones Jr. is going to make a ton. I mean, I think he made $9 million on his last deal, 9.7. He got the full MLE from Portland. I think that he'll probably sign for something similar to what Thybulle makes anyway. I mean, within that, like, 1 to 2 million of that, maybe. I mean, he is a useful rotation wing, but, like, that was my thought, was that maybe you go get Derek Jones Jr. and you get him to do what you hoped Thybulle would be able to do when we got James Harden, which was basically play that, like, Bruce Brown type role, because Derek Jones Jr. has done that in Chicago, and he's done it much better than Matisse Thybulle because he, has the ability to touch a basketball without panicking, and which is, like, a good thing when you're trying to play in the NBA. But I do think that, like, the Derek Jones Jr. thing is interesting to me, because I had people asking me, do you think they would give up their first round pick? And my answer was no. And I was like, I don't think they would give up, because they have, like, the 18th pick in the draft. Like, I don't think Thybulle's good enough to really justify that. And I was thinking, well, maybe you could do like, we get 18, we move up, we get Derrick Jones Jr. in a sign and trade, but that's almost impossible because you'd have to agree to that like a week in advance. Technically, we're not even allowed to talk to Derrick Jones Jr. during that time, even though we all know everyone tampers and does all that shit. So like, it would basically have to be like Kobe White going to another team. They're over the Kobe White experience. Kobe White going to another team, Thybulle going in there. Maybe if they bring back Zach, like, do they really even need guards that much anyway? Like between DeRozan, Lavine, Lonzo, Ao, like I think that they would be fine with the guards that they have. Maybe they're just looking to get kind of a defensive wing, and then you send it to another team. An idea that I had, and keep in mind, this also doesn't make any sense, but this is slop stuff. This is what we do. If there was a way, and this was inspired by Nihilist Bucks, who Nihilist Bucks tweeted a picture of the Bucks trading like players who are not good for PJ Washington, who is good.
Sure.
And but I tweeted at him and I said, I would also like to trade bad players for good players. Like that's the concept here. But my point on this was like, he basically had said, and he had heard, by the way, he came on my podcast, he talked about the Ayton stuff. He talked about a bunch of stuff that actually ended up happening. And like stuff is coming out now about it. And he had heard around the same time that the Hornets were shopping PJ Washington at the deadline and they were looking for a first round pick. So is there a scenario where like, we're just like shuffling around the picks from the 2019 draft and we're like Kobe White, and not, once again, they already have Terry Rozier and LaMelo Ball and they're trying to develop Book Night and all that stuff. So maybe this doesn't work at all, but like they send him down to Charlotte. They send Kobe to Charlotte. We send Thybulle to Chicago, and we send 23, the 23rd pick, to Charlotte, and we get back PJ Washington. Now that would be fantastic. He would be the kind of the perfect 3-4 type. I know he plays 4-5 mostly too, but like he's a flexible guy. He can play multiple positions. He can shoot. He can defend. He can rebound. Like, that's the kind of move that like I would be willing to give up the 23rd pick for, especially if we take my least favorite player on the team, Matisse Thybulle, and turn him into PJ Washington.
Yeah. I mean, I think they should be open to at least hearing out Matisse offers, and Kyle Neubeck of Philly Voice reported that they will be. But like,
he's not untouchable. I was like,
right. But like during the end of season press conference, Daryl and Doc both said they still had confidence in Matisse. Like, ultimately, the fundamental question is, do you think he develops the shot this offseason?
No, because he sucks. Let's move on. No, bye.
That is the choice that you need to make, because if you think he even could, there is a slight possibility that he could, then you probably just keep him and let him become a restricted free agent next year. Like, clearly he's not getting an extension. If he stays in Philly, like, there's absolutely no reason to sign him to an extension. Let him become a restricted free agent. You can match whatever he gets. Yeah. Like, you could negotiate a sign and trade if someone goes way above, your market price for him. But frankly, a defense first player who struggled to stay on the floor in the playoffs, like, I don't think there's going to be a $20 million a year offer waiting for him. Like 10 to 12 million at most per year is probably what he's looking at. So, they could punt this decision for a year. Like, you don't absolutely have to trade him. It's more,
you do, for my sanity and the fact that I have to cover this team now. So for me personally, please do not have Matisse Thybulle. My thing with Matisse Thybulle is that I'm convinced he does not care about basketball. Like, and which is fine. I'm totally, like, it's your job. You can do that totally fine. But like, if I'm building a team, that is not the mentality of guys that I want on the team. He has gotten by on his natural ability, and like, he's a genius defender, and he's amazingly talented on that end. But like, he has not one time even tried to develop his offensive game, really, other than just like, I'm going to run to the basket and dunk it when I'm wide open, which is like literally the bare minimum. You're 25 years old now. Like, I just think I think one of the reasons why he might have trade value is because of what you're talking about right now, which is like, there might be a team out there, whether it's the Pelicans or the Spurs or one of these teams that has a history of fixing guys' shots and figuring it out. I just genuinely don't think Thybulle's that dedicated to, like, he's not Tyrese Maxey. Like, he's just not, he's not a work, like, grind guy. And that's, once again, fine. I totally understand that. I'm not like that with my job, whatever. But, like, at the same time, like, he is, like, his appeal to teams is that they're going to bring him in, they're going to be able to fix the shot, and they'll make him into, like, the new Danny Green, right? Who's just like, stay out of the way, shoot threes, play amazing defense, awesome. And that's why I think that if there are deals out there this offseason for him, there could be somewhat of a market. And I think that he probably does get traded just because I think he has enough belief. Like, a year ago, there were reports that we could have gotten near a lottery pick for him. And I was like, do it.
yeah. Well, because I think,
like, please.
Like, as you said, 2 all second team all defense. Like, his reputation on defense, I think, kind of overshadows who he is as a defender. Or maybe that's just my perception of him after this year. Like, he was miscast in that number 1 perimeter stopper role. Like, he's so good in terms of off-ball defense.
For sure.
And, like, he comes up with these highlight steals and highlight blocks, and that's great. But, like, teams know that he overplays. He's, like, overly aggressive, and they use that against him, and he picks up a bunch of dumb fouls. And, like, because it's so central to who he is as a defender, I don't know if you're going to be able to, like, coax that out of him to, like, harness your aggression only when you aren't going to get a foul call, or only when, like, if you're going to go flying up for a block. Like, shooters are smart in the NBA. They're just going to, jump up and, like, get a dumb foul called on you, and then you're just not going to be available. So, part of it is, like, is this the second coming of Michael Carter-Williams, where, like, you just need to trade him now before other teams catch on to, like, oh, maybe this guy isn't as good as we thought, or, like, he doesn't have the same kind of upside that we think he has.
They should have done it a year ago. Like, I mean, really, like, I think that, like, this idea that we were having a conversation about Seth Curry versus Matisse Thybulle was always insane to me. I was like, this is legitimate. Seth Curry's a good NBA player. Like, I know that he has his flaws too, and, like, can be targeted defensively and all that stuff. But, like, one of the things that I always come back to with Thybulle is, like, every year in the playoffs, he's invisible. And I don't want guys on the Sixers anymore who are invisible in the playoffs. Like, I want guys who are 16-game players. I don't want 82-game players. And I think that, like, I think they might have missed their window to get maximum value for Thybulle, to get that higher pick, to get that legitimate role player back. Like, I can never remember his name. Bob Voulgaris was on Bill Simmons' podcast, and he was talking about how they were always searching for those 3-and-D type wings. They tried to get Mikal Bridges when he was a rookie. They tried to get, like, they eventually traded for Josh Richardson, the Seth Curry trade, which was kind of a disaster for them. Sure. And then they almost traded Brunson for Thybulle, he said. Like, they were constructing a deal around Brunson for Thybulle. And I'm like, so now I think about, like, we could have had Jalen Brunson. We could have had, if not a lottery pick, a near lottery pick. These are rumors. Maybe maybe some of there isn't 100% truth to this, but it feels like there were multiple opportunities that we had to trade Thybulle when his value was extremely high. And now we're going to get back, like, we're talking about, like, we got to give up a bunch of other stuff just to get back, like, a decent role player for him, like a PJ Washington type, or, like, someone that is, like, like, could you give up Thybulle, Korkmaz, and our first for Jay Crowder? I don't think the Suns would do that. And, like, I know that the Suns need to pay Cam Johnson, and they already paid Mikal Bridges, and who knows what's happening with the 8 and stuff, which we'll get to in a little bit. But, like, it is just frustrating that, like, it feels like we had a window to, like, really get back legit value for this guy. And now we're talking about, like, 5th starters and, like, good players, but, like, not guys that, like, are really going to make all that much of a difference unless we're giving up a bunch of other stuff with him.
Yeah, I'd say the one other option that I would at least explore, and again, this is something you have to decide pretty early in the offseason, you can guarantee Danny's contract to use him as just salary filler. So if you combine him with Matisse, you get up to about 14.4 million. So that can at least open the door for you to take a bigger contract back. Again, as I mentioned like way earlier, it all comes down to Harden, because if you're doing that, then Harden, let's say he signs at 42 million, then you're still going to go over the apron. You're only going to have the taxpayer mid-level. So like everything starts with that. And then there's the domino effect from there. Like, I am more leaning toward just, if you think you can get a legit guy, a legit starter caliber forward with the non-taxpayer mid-level, mostly just run it back and then spend the biannual on another wing. And like, maybe having continuity for a change. Like you mentioned, that's part of the value of bringing Doc back. It's not like every goddamn offseason is like, oh, here's 3 new starters this year. Like we're already gonna have to do it with Danny because he got hurt. But do you want to replace
that is what it is? Yeah.
Tobias? Do you want to replace Thybulle? Do you want to replace Doc as well? Or maybe just having all of these guys who have been together now for a couple of seasons, and like we get a full off season of Harden. We did see like early in the Harden time, like that there was a game against the Bulls where they were running like pick and rolls with Thybulle and Harden, and they were getting good looks out of that. So maybe
who were they playing?
The Bulls, I believe. The Thigh Bulls, as you said. Yeah.
They were playing the Chicago Bulls. That's my point. Is that like this? My whole thing with like bringing Thybulle back, and like I'm fine with bringing Tobias back because I have now seen Tobias play well in a handful of playoff games, and I'm like, he can hang on the floor. Thybulle will never be you can mark my words right now, he will never be a rotation player in the playoffs that you can trust. You can't be afraid to touch the ball in the playoffs and just be a playable player. Like no matter what he does defensively, no matter what he does, like unless he becomes a 40-point 3-point shooter and can attack closeouts, like there's just no road for him to stay on the floor, which is why I think that like he should be used right now for a trade. And I mean, the Korkmaz thing, like people might view that as negative salary as well. Like maybe you can't even get off that deal, whatever. But like, I do think that like there is value in running it back, but you have to you talked about like putting all your assets towards like the MLE and the non-taxpayer mid-level towards wings and forwards. And I agree with that. But I also think that you need to put everything on the playoffs and nothing on the regular season. Matisse Thybulle making $5 million and another guy who Doc is going to play in the playoffs, even if he's horrendous, is like we talk about the wash bigs, but like he's going to do it with Thybulle too. He's going to do it with his guys that he trusts. Like, and I just don't even want to give him the option. And I also I don't want to invest any more time in a guy who just has never gotten better. And like, we've already done this with Ben Simmons, and like Ben Simmons was 100 times the basketball player that Matisse Thybulle is. So you understood the appeal of that. So yeah, I just want to get out ahead of it before it gets to the point where like we're talking in a year from now and we're like, well, maybe we can get Thybulle back at $5 million and he can be the 9th man. Like, no, like let's figure out a way to get off the Thybulle contract and let another team try to fix Thybulle, and we'll like get back. Like I literally would do Matisse Thybulle for Torrey Craig straight up. Like I just think Torrey Craig's a better player. We've seen him play late into the playoffs. He can occasionally shoot. He can occasionally put the ball on the floor. He can lock up defensively. He played great defense on Paul George in the Western Conference Finals last year. They make a similar amount of money. Like if Phoenix offered that, I would do it straight up. Like that's how low I am on Thybulle. It's crazy. Like I just really do not want to see him back on the team next year. But he's like the one guy that like I'm fine with running it back with anyone else. If Thybulle and Doc are both here next year, I'm going to be pulling my hair out.
I mean, I will say this about last offseason and like throughout the first half of last season, we just had to deal with like Ben Simmons purgatory, and we just didn't know what this team was going to look like moving forward. Assuming Harden does come back in whatever player option, whatever. All of the guys should structure their offseason programs around how am I going to play with Harden and with Embiid. So like if Thybulle does come back, he should know, okay, this is what they're going to need out of me on offense in particular. And these are the things that I'm really going to drill down. Like maybe I don't need to work on my dribble because they're not going to ask me to be, like one of the main half court options passing wise. Like I just need to be able to knock down corner threes or play as the short roll guy. Like if we are going to run Harden Thybulle pick and rolls occasionally, like just work on a couple specific skills that would make you playable with these particular players because they are building the team around these guys. They aren't going anywhere. If anything, they're going to trade everything else to get guys who fit those two.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just don't think he cares. I don't think he's going to work on his game at all. Like that's my whole thing. And like, yeah, maybe he'll be in the gym, but like, what tangible improvements has he ever made? He's never tried to change his shot. Once again, the main improvement from him has been running towards the basket, which is just kind of like a feel thing that like you feel throughout the course of a game. Right. Like, and I just think that like, he's probably working on like Audacity or something. Maybe he's working on a podcast or like maybe he's gonna do this. Maybe he's got Final Cut up. He's making a documentary this summer. Like I just don't think he really like he talks about working on his game in the offseason and then I never see any improvements ever. So I'm over trying to even picture what that looks like. But let's get into the Slop roundup.
Yes.
This is going to be a much more enjoyable part than talking about Matisse Thybulle for me and Doc Rivers. But so let's get into the Slop roundup. Let's stay with the Bulls theme here. The Zach Lavine stuff. So the rumor is that Zach Lavine, I think all of this is a ploy. I think that Chicago is probably like, look, we'll give you the 4-year max, or like, we'll give you the 5-year max, but slightly under that, kind of like whatever, like we paid Tobias, which technically was not like the full 5-year max or whatever.
It's like 10 or like $5 million less.
Yeah, exactly.
Well
like
done,
they're trying to cut. Yeah, exactly. Masterclass to undercut Tobias Harris like that. The 59th best player in the NBA to get that extra $5 million. But I think that the rumors right now are that LeVar Ball goes on a podcast and says that he doesn't think that Zach's going to be back. Says he thinks he didn't like the fact that he wasn't the guy because they got DeMar, which is funny because then 5 seconds later he said he wanted to go to the Lakers to play with Anthony Davis and LeBron James. So I don't really know how that works. And then on top of that, a Bulls reporter came out and said it's not a lock that he comes back. Lavine saying nice things about the Lakers in TMZ earlier today. Oh. The Hawks are being thrown out around there. A few weeks ago, DeJounte Murray posted a picture of him in a Spurs jersey. They grew up together. Like, there's a lot of smoke. And the fact that Zach said that he's going to take meetings with other teams, or at least they've implied that, tells me that there might be a real possibility that Zach Lavine leaves this offseason.
I think if the Bulls don't offer him the full 5-year max, it's at least on the table. Yeah. But they would be really stupid not to do it. And all of this, as you said, just feels like Clutch trying to bully them into it in just the most blatantly obvious way possible. Like, at least be subtle about it. But saying, oh, I'm going to take free agent meetings. Oh, I like the Lakers, even though they don't have cap space and have no way to acquire me. But just
okay, we say this, but did we not experience the same thing with Jimmy Butler?
Yeah, that's true. Oh my God. Imagine a Russ Lavine sign and trade.
Well, that's what I'm saying is what I'm trying to get at here is at first I did think it was all just a ploy to, and I still do think that it is Clutch mostly, especially because they use the Lakers and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I do think that when a guy's I'm going to take meetings with other teams, that's a red flag, because 9 times out of 10, I believe John Hollinger said the only time he can remember that they had a guy take meetings with another team and they re-signed was Mike Conley. And Mike Conley only did it because it was the first time he was ever a free agent, and because he just wanted to see what else was out there, but he always wanted to stay in Memphis basically. So maybe that's the situation with Zach, but I remember the 2019 offseason, and when the Jimmy Butler stuff started to come out about Are they going to offer him the 5-year max? Is it on the table? He might be willing to take meetings. Miami's interested. We all laughed it off. We were like, but history shows stars get what they want. And history shows on top of that, the Lakers and the Heat get it whatever the fuck they want. And that's the one part about it that if I was a Bulls fan would scare me with Lavine leaving.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'd be worried if they aren't willing to pay the full 5-year max, they should be worried. Yes. But they should be willing to pay the full 5-year max, and this should be a non-story.
That's on them. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Like what did you build all this for?
Right. Like, why did you make the Vucevic trade? Why did you bring in DeMar DeRozan and Alex Caruso and Lonzo Ball last year? Like, all of that felt like, hey, Zach, we're trying to build an actual winner. And then, but we're not going to re-sign one of the central pieces for that? Like, why did you trade away 3 draft picks to bring in Vooch and DeRozan, who are over the age of 30, if you're going to lose your best young player? And, I guess, I mean, I know this has been divisive on Bulls Twitter. Like, there are some Bulls fans who are like, Zach Lavine's not a max player. And it's like, you are just not paying attention to the NBA marketplace right now. Like, this is just, you could argue that too many guys get max contracts, and I wouldn't push back against that. But, like, based on the caliber of player that gets a max contract, Zach Lavine is a max player. And that's just the cost of doing business with someone like him. And maybe it does make it harder to build an actual championship contending team in the future because you've got him instead of like a top 5 guy as one of your max guys. But at the same time,
if that's what you were concerned with, then don't trade for DeMar DeRozan and Nikola Vucevic.
And like, there's a cap spike coming at some point in the later half of this decade. Like, come 25, 26, the NBA gets new TV deals. My podcast co-host Morton Jensen reported on Forbes back, I think it's September at this point. If they don't do a smoothing, which hopefully they learned their lesson from 2016, but if they don't, it could go up to $170 million. So like, all of these contracts, James Harden included, if we're talking about 4 or 5 year deals, the back half of these contracts, we're thinking of them in like 30-35% of the salary cap every year. Like, it might be sub 20% for all we know. So like, that could and potentially should incentivize teams to lock in longer deals, knowing like, the back half of this might not be as bad as we think it will be.
Yeah, it's a great point. And once again, like, if you're Chicago, you built all this to keep Zach. You're not willing to give the 5-year max. Like, what was even the plan here? Like, I think they will just like you did all this just to then get like cheap out at the last second. It doesn't make any sense to me. And if your goal is to win a championship, then don't trade for Vooch and DeMar, because like, I liked Vooch and DeMar, but like, if they're 2 of your 3 best players, your defense is never going to be good enough to win a championship anyway. So like, you should just try to remain competitive. Those deals come off the book soon too. Like, I mean, I think they both have 2 years left on their deals. If I remember correctly, Vooch might only have 1 year left.
Vooch is after this year, I think.
So you can, like, I know you don't have a ton of draft picks, but like, they didn't give up. I think they have 2 draft picks that are still out, maybe 1. And like, you're not like, you still have things to work with. Like, you can try to develop guys. You could try to rebuild around Zach if the DeMar and Vooch thing kind of falls apart as they get older. Like, I think that they'll end up offering in the 5-year max and I'll stay. But like, I definitely would be worried based on all of the things that are coming out right now about this, because it doesn't seem like it would be necessary for it to come out if they were like 5-year max first day. Yeah. Like, don't worry about it. Like, there might be whisperings, and like, they might have talked already, and there might have been like, the ownership, I don't know. Like, so
that's my guess, that like Clutch and the Bulls management have like discussed the general framework, and there has been some hesitation about a full 5-year max. So Clutch is like, oh yeah, we're going to go play PR war now, but we're going to do it in our dumbass way. Like, what, you haven't seen the Anthony Davis and Ben Simmons thing? Here you go. Here's your own taste of it.
It's Clutch, baby. All right. So more Slop. Deandre Ayton, the Hawks, Pistons, Blazers, Hornets, Spurs are interested in him. The Pacers had interest at the deadline. This is all from Jake Fisher. So a draft night trade for Ayton is the one thing that people keep bringing up, which would be impossible because he is a free agent. So it would have to be a sign and trade. I think that like this idea that like the Blazers could give up 7 or the Kings could give up 4 and get Ayton is very far-fetched because every team tampers. We know they do it. It's the same thing that we talked about earlier. Like they could technically do it, but at the same time, like now the report's coming out saying like the Suns might not even match it.
Yeah.
Like, why are you doing a sign and trade if you're just like, give him the best offer? Like we're willing to max him. We'll clear the cap space. If we're the Pistons, we're going to have it. If we're the Blazers, we can create it. Like, why not just see if Phoenix is really not willing to match it and just let him walk? And why give up any assets?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And, you know, another complicating factor for an Ayton sign and trade is that he's going to be one of these base year compensation guys. So his amount of outgoing salary for trade purposes is not going to be the same as the incoming salary. So he's only going to count as 15 going out. And then the team getting him, if he gets a max deal, he's going to count as the full 30. So, you know, if it's a team that has some cap space and has some flexibility, like Portland is in that group, Indiana, San Antonio, you can come up with some sign and trade ideas that make sense. Detroit as well. I saw someone float like Jerami Grant for DeAndre Ayton, and that, you know, they could make that work. But it's not like Sacramento, who is going to be over the cap. I don't know if there's going to be an easy 2-team deal to construct that makes sense for both sides.
Yeah, and I think that Pistons one is very interesting because the Pistons or the Pacers one that you talked about, which was Miles Turner for Ayton, where it's like, you know, the Pacers get a little bit younger. Like, I mean, the argument would be if you're the Suns, you need to get something back for him. And like, you need to at least pretend like you're going to match that contract. Because if you're not willing to at least play ball a little bit, then a team could just be like, fuck it, let's throw him the max offer sheet and see if they won't match it. And then we just get to get him for nothing. And then if we're the Pistons, we can either keep Jerami Grant or we can trade Jerami Grant to Portland because Damian Lillard seems to, you know, be infatuated with the idea of him. And we can kind of have we can speed up our rebuild and we can get more prospects in here. And like, we can kind of be good next year. So I think that the Pacers and the Pistons are the two most obvious choices here just because they have legit starting caliber bigs or whatever you want to call Jerami Grant. He can play the 5 a little bit, but he's mostly a 4. Like, you know, Miles Turner is kind of a plug and play. Like, it makes sense for both sides to me. Like, I would actually be interested to see if they could get Miles Turner back. Like, that would probably be the best player you could get in an Ayton sign and trade. Just take it and figure out the rest later. Because honestly, I think I'd rather pay Miles Turner $19 million a year than pay DeAndre Ayton the full max.
Yeah, I think it's tricky from Phoenix's standpoint because like now we're hearing, I mean, Jake Fisher just published this thing today about like, you know, he butted heads with Monty Williams and they questioned his commitment. And so like there might be a lot of stuff.
He's a gamer. He plays video games. Kevin Arnovitz said. Oh, damn. Cut him.
That, you know, for both Turner and Jerami Grant, they're both heading into the last year of their contract. So, you know, maybe you make that deal and like figure it out later, but you know, ideally you at least have some general sense of like, okay, if we're going to have to re-sign Miles Turner or sign Miles Turner to an extension this summer, what does that look like? Or, you know, Jake has been reporting about Jerami Grant that he wants to go to a team where he could be like the 1A. And he's eligible for like a 4-year, $112 million max extension this summer. And he wants that. And like, that would make me nervous if I'm Phoenix. So
true.
I think I would prefer Turner over Grant. Like Grant would be interesting for them, but like, they're going to have a clear void at center. So like Turner positionally makes more sense in a Ayton sign and trade. But, you know, Jake's article today, I guess the Suns were saying like, look, you know, JaVale McGee and Bismack Biyombo filled in for Ayton while he was out. And like Chris Paul coaxed some pretty good play out of them. So maybe we're okay just paying like $5 million for a center and spending our resources elsewhere, which, you know, if that's your strategy, more power to you.
It's not the worst plan if you don't have one of the two best guys. Like,
yeah,
you put all your resources. Like, if you don't have Jokic or Embiid, like putting all your resources into another avenue of wings and guards and whatever, and then just getting like a replacement level center. But like Bismack Biyombo and JaVale McGee are not going to be playable deep into the playoffs, especially if Chris Paul is not Chris Paul, because by the way, he fell off a cliff towards the end of this season in those few games. And like, who knows if that's what he is now, like even if he's somewhere in between what he was in the regular season at the beginning of the playoffs and what he showed in those last few games. Like, you can't just depend on Chris Paul to lift up your center when he's 37 years old. Like, I do think that it's a fine line to walk between like JaVale McGee and Bismack Biyombo and DeAndre Ayton. Like, Miles Turner would kind of be the happy medium there, where like you're paying a center still, but like he's a good center and he doesn't make a ton of money. Like, he makes that, I think, 19 million, 20 million a year. And then it's like, that's perfect, because then you can still like pay Cam Johnson and Mikal Bridges and maybe even keep Jay Crowder. And then you have your team of wings plus Booker and CP3. And then Turner, you know, he can shoot a little bit. He can do a little bit offensively. He's a great defender. I think Ayton might be a little bit more useful defensively in the playoffs, but like, I do think that like that's, you have to get something, and you have to keep Devin Booker being like, hey, we got something going on here, because otherwise Devin Booker is going to start to look around and be like, okay, you just let Ayton walk. Chris Paul's about to die of old age. And it's me and Mikal Bridges and like a bunch of guys. So like, I do think that just from like from that standpoint, like they have to think about every single avenue here. They can't just be like, yeah, let's roll out 36-year-old JaVale McGee and it will be fine.
Right. Maybe they'll spend the taxpayer mid-level on Andre Drummond and they'll call
there we go.
But
who's proven to be very playable in the playoffs.
Oh yeah, definitely. For as much as I wouldn't be worried if I'm a Bulls fan about Zach Lavine, I think there is legitimate smoke to, like, I would be surprised at this point if Ayton is back in Phoenix. There seems like way too much of like, oh no, this guy is just genuinely gone.
Yep, which is crazy to think that they drafted him over. Okay, so we always bring up the Luka thing because the Luka pick was the most obvious. He was clearly the best prospect in that draft. The fact that he went third is like crazy.
Yeah.
But like, I feel like people don't also talk about the fact that like Ayton's very good and he's just as good as a lot of guys from that draft. But like that draft was historically good.
Yeah,
like, not only do you have Luka, you had Trey, you have Jaren Jackson Jr., you had Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Michael Porter Jr. if he doesn't get hurt. Like, even you got, like, we drafted Mikal Bridges, traded him there. Like Miles Bridges is pretty good. Like, that entire lottery is fucking stacked with talent. And to walk away with DeAndre Ayton and then have him leave and not even sign a second contract with you. And it's not even like the Bagley thing where he just like sucked. Like, it's just like,
right.
It hurts even more because you're like, wait, no, he's good and we're not going to keep him. Like, I would be pulling my hair out if I were a Suns fan.
It's got to be just brutal. I mean, to think you were 2 wins away from a championship last year. You had the best regular season record this year. Seemed like you were the best team. You know, Chris Paul aged in dog years in the playoffs, like just aged a decade overnight and fell apart. And now it's like, oh, well, this window just slammed shut. Like, we're not, if Ayton leaves, you know, the Clippers are going to be better next year. The Nuggets are going to be better next year. Who knows about the Nets, but like the Bucks are going to be back, the Heat, the Celtics, like it's only going to get tougher from here. So, you know, Chris Paul is pushing back against like, well, was that your best last chance to win a title? And it's like, it probably was.
It definitely was. Like, even if the Suns go on another run, that was still a very, very good chance. And last year was by far the best chance. Like, undeniably. Like, even if they somehow win a title, like, it doesn't mean that this year and last year weren't like amazing opportunities to win a title when you're Chris Paul's age.
Right. It's like the Sixers. Like, did they have a good chance last year against the Hawks? Yeah, they blew it. They stepped on a rake and smacked themselves in the face. But like, they had a much better chance of winning a title last year with Ben Simmons than they did this year, given the road they had to face and like incorporating James Harden on the fly.
Exactly. Absolutely fucking sucks. But let's just wrap up the last few things here. The Blazers could use the 7th pick to trade for a vet to build around Dame. I kind of brought that up. Okay, so the Jerami Grant thing, I actually, the more I've thought about it, the more I'm like, I don't love this draft. Like, I think there are a handful of guys that are like at the top of the draft. Like, if you have like the Kings trading a top 4 pick for Jerami Grant or a win now vet would be a disaster, because one of those top 4 guys, whether it's Ivy, Paolo, Chet, or Jabari, like if you have a shot at one of those guys, take one of those guys, figure out the rest later. And if they suck, they like whatever, they suck. Like it happens, like shit happens. As you get a little bit further down, like Maury talked about this before, and I've kind of had this a little bit like come around to the idea of the Blazers trading their pick for like trading the 7th pick and trying to get like a Jerami Grant level player. Cause like, I think they traded like the 8th or 9th pick for Shane Battier and got a lot of shit. And Maury was like, if you look at the history, like it was a weak draft. If you look at the history of guys that get selected outside of the top 5, like Shane Battier had a better career than the large majority of players that are selected in the range that we were selecting in. And we felt comfortable trading him because he was on a good contract. Like, we felt like he could help us win. And I feel like if your goal is to compete with Damian Lillard, you're not going to win a title with Damian Lillard. Like at this point, like there's just too much talent in the NBA and you just don't have enough of it. Unless Simons continues to get even better and like makes multiple leaps towards like superstardom, and Dame is still somewhat Dame, like your window's shut. So like, if your goal is to compete with Dame and keep him happy in Portland and just be like a fun team, then maybe trading for Jerami Grant, maybe trading the 7th pick for Jerami Grant isn't the worst idea in the world.
I guess so. I mean, like, I feel like your job as a general manager, as a team president, is to think about both the short term and the long term.
For sure.
As much as you want to keep Dame and appease him, keep him happy, you also need to go to your owner and be like, look, like, do my job for me. Chart out the next 3 years to get us back into the title picture with Damian Lillard earning $50 million a year and us having basically nothing else on the roster. Like, we'll re-sign Simons this summer, but then we're going to be, foreseeably capped out. So, like, how do we do this? Is Jerami Grant really going to be that missing piece, especially given his reported role and contract demands? So, like, I get it if they're interested in him. 7 feels a bit rich. So, like, if anything, I would try to trade down, pick up an additional asset, and then trade that pick. Like, if you can trade down to, 11 or 12 and get
a player,
a future first, or like, maybe you trade down to 11 with the Knicks and get Cam Reddish, since they apparently hate him and did not run that trade by tips at all. And then, like, if you have Cam Reddish and Jerami Grant, sure, maybe, like, I can talk.
You're taking flyers, basically.
Yeah, I guess so. But, like, I don't know. I mean, I get it because Dame is, the face of the franchise, but I am just so not on board with, like, what is the long-term plan here? Is it really just we're going to hope to be a 45-win team? We're going to sneak into the playoffs through the play-in tournament every year and be like a fun first-round exit? That's what you're aspiring to? Because that's the only realistic outcome here. Like, there is no realistic outcome for them to rebuild a title contender on the fly around him. So
I do think about the fact that, like, ever since Joe Cronin got in there, he's just made horrible moves. Like, like pretty much disastrous trades from the jump. Like, think about it like this. He gets the job. His first trade, he trades away 2 good rotation players in Robert Covington and Norman Powell for Keon Johnson, who, whatever you think about Keon Johnson, he went at the end of the first round not that long ago. Like, I don't think he's a very good prospect. I don't think that he was worth whatever they traded for him. And then they got expiring salary in Eric Bledsoe and Justice Winslow, and they could at least say, well, we want to be bad this year and we want to clear cap space. Right. Okay, so that's your argument. We want to be bad. Then they turn around, they try to get the pick for CJ McCollum. They get Josh Hart, who's a good player, starter level good wing, for CJ McCollum. Okay, whatever. Plus they tried to get
Larry
that first round pick, but they also gave up Larry Nance in that trade, who's also a good player, a starter level player in the NBA. So they gave up their sub all-star and a starter level player for Josh Hart and a fake first round pick that is now going to be a few years from now a Milwaukee first, because the Pelicans ended up making the playoffs. So, but you say again, well, we want to be bad. That's the point. We want to be bad. Okay, so you did all that tanking to clear up cap space and get the 7th pick in the draft to just get Jerami Grant?
Right.
Like, it's a disaster through and through. Like, no matter what they do, unless they hit on that 7th pick, and that 7th pick is a future all-star, they're fucked.
Yeah. I mean, like, we have seen the difference that hitting on one pick can make. Like Tyrese Maxey, if not for him,
for sure,
the Sixers would be very much in the same boat right now. So you're right. If they hit on that pick, that could change the trajectory of that franchise. But
or the Utah Jazz with Donovan Mitchell and Bam. I'm thinking of guys who were drafted later. The Miami Heat with Bam Adebayo. Like,
Gobert.
It can change the trajectory of your franchise just hitting on that one pick. And like, is the opportunity cost of that worth it for just trading for a guy who, once again, is like the 60th best player in the NBA, like in Jerami Grant, and wants a bunch of money
contract.
It's definitely something to consider. I don't know. I just think Portland's, I mean, just botching both of those plus being committed to Dame, who, as great as Dame is, and he will come back and probably be very good again next year. I just think that this just completely made it so, like, I don't even think they can get to a conference finals. I don't think they can I don't even think they'll ever get out of the first round unless Simons gets significantly better pretty fast. So
yeah, I mean, they're facing an uphill battle, but if you just look at the West, like, even if, let's say, Phoenix drops off because Ayton leaves and Utah blows itself up, like, the Clippers are only going to get better. Denver's only going to get better. The Warriors are not going anywhere. Memphis is only going to get better. Dallas, the Pelicans, if Zion stays healthy, like the Timberwolves, now that they have competent management, like the Lakers are still there. And as you said, shit just tends to work out for them. So like, as long as they got LeBron and AD, it's always a hope there. Like it just, I don't even see the pathway back to like a top 8 seed, much less get back to the conference finals.
Well, I do think that the road to that for them is Simon's getting much better, which I think he will. I think he's really good.
Yeah.
I think Simon's getting much better. Dame returning to a normal level of play, and then just surrounding them with the kind of guys that they want to surround them with, which were long wings who can defend and shoot, and like the Jerami Grants, the Josh Harts, the idea of what Keon Johnson can become, and then just have like a defensive center in Nurkic and kind of hope from there that you can kind of put together a good enough team around them. But let's go to our last thing here, which is the Lakers. I had the Kings with the win now vet thing, but we already have talked everything. Trading the 4th pick in this draft for a win now vet, which you'd have to match salary. It doesn't make any fucking sense. That would be a disaster for the Kings. Once again, don't do that. Just draft whoever the best player is at 4, or try to move up and get someone even better in the top 2, in the top 3. Like, don't do that, Sacramento. They can't help themselves. But
or trade it for Tobias Harris. Either way.
Yes, or more. I mean, if you want a real win now vet, locker room guy.
Yeah,
him and Fox can talk about NFTs. It would be
great.
Yeah, it would be absolutely awesome. But the last thing that I have here, other than Bradley Beal re-signing with the Wizards, which is probably going to happen, shocker, the 27th best player in the NBA is not turning down the largest contract extension in NBA history, as I've discussed many times. And even though I wanted him on the Sixers at one point, I understand why he's doing this.
Yep.
And the last thing is the Lakers, which is there's a new report that came out that said the belief is that the Lakers would have to attach at least 1 first-round pick to get off the Russell Westbrook deal, and they are not willing to do that. So is Russell Westbrook going to be on the Lakers again next year is the question, because in what world are they getting off the Russell Westbrook contract without giving up a first-round pick?
The only deal that makes sense is like John Wall for a pick swap. And even still, like, that is...
Why would Houston do that?
I don't know. To buy him out? I don't know. There's no there's no real like I guess for their purposes it doesn't matter either way because neither John Wall nor Russell Westbrook factor in. So like you're betting on, if you're getting a pick swap in like 26, let's say, like by that point LeBron James is how old? 40, 41, and is probably playing with Bronny or retired and probably not in LA. And then like you're building around an oft injured AD, and John Wall expires after next year. So like I would bet on Lakers incompetence in the latter half of this decade because we've seen all the reports coming out of like who's in charge here, and it's really like Linda Rambis, shadow GM, which is so if that's on the table, I think I would do it. But when you've got a 37-year-old LeBron James, you've got to really be worried about your 2029 first round pick too. Those timelines line up perfectly. So I totally understand why they were going to bring Russ back. I mean, I don't know, man. Like we've seen it since the deadline. There seems to be this like just shifting of the blame. Like everyone is like, oh no, it wasn't our idea to bring him in. Like Pelinka's like, oh no, it was Clutch's fault. And Clutch is like, oh no, we don't have any say on this team. It was all Pelinka's fault. It's like someone's just got to own up and deal with it. Like Pelinka seems to want to be like, well, LeBron and AD, you wanted this guy, make it work. Like we're not going to give up any more picks in the future because we gave up so much to get him, and it's your fault. So you guys have to fix it. And LeBron and AD are like, fuck you, we're gonna outlast you. No, we don't want to play with this guy anymore. Get rid of him. And like we don't care about the 29 pick because neither of us are gonna be on this team by the time that pick comes around.
Yeah, exactly. And I do think that like I thought about the John Wall thing, and I thought about like there are just no realistic trades that could happen unless they're willing to include both of those, and then maybe also Taylor Horton Tucker or something like something that is like Kendrick Nunn, or like I don't even know what they could include in a trade that like spices up the pot in order for a team to send back even something that's like remotely useful. If it's like you're sending back like Kemba Walker and Fournier, if you're the Knicks or something, you're just trying to get in like assets or whatever it is. Like it doesn't make any sense to me. And I think that the fact that the Lakers are such a joke is so insane because it's like you're the Lakers, you have LeBron James and Anthony Davis, and like everything has gone not well there the past 2 years, obviously, but like you can in theory like just easily rebuild the team around these two guys if you don't make this massive mistake that, by the way, you came on the podcast after the draft last year and we were like, what are they doing? And like I've thought about it and I'm like, it's the only move I can think of where it was just like universally panned to the point where it was like, why are they doing this? And the only people that thought it was a good idea were whoever was the one that was behind this, whether it was Pelinka or Anthony Davis and LeBron James or whatever, like they were the only ones that thought this would work out. And it's hilarious to have to now see themselves dig themselves up out of this. And it doesn't really seem like there's a way out. Like if there were betting odds on this, I would bet on Russell Westbrook either being on the Lakers next year or getting like bought out or something, because I just don't see a world in which you're going to be able to get back anything remotely good for him unless you're willing to attach one first round pick, if not two.
Right. I mean, the problem is he just earns so much money. So like, okay, he's a $47.1 million expiring contract. There are only 11 guys in the NBA right now earning $40 million or more next year. So it's just like hard math-wise to assemble enough salary to get anything for Russell Westbrook, much less like, okay, who's on a bad enough contract that you're trying to shed multiple years? Like, are the Wizards going to do Porzingis, bring back Russell Westbrook and pair with Bradley Beal? We could send out Porzingis. Like, even Porzingis is at 33.8 next year. Or like an idea that came to me today. What if Tim Connolly is like, we don't really want D'Angelo Russell anymore. Like, we'll take Russ, but Russell's only at 31.4. And again, they're going to want a pick to take him on. Like, you're not going to get a better player in. Like, all this pipe dream stuff of like, oh, well, we're going to trade Russ and like THT or Russ and, Kendrick Nunn for Malcolm Brogdon and Buddy Hield and Miles Turner. It's like, Why are the Pacers saying yes to that? They're not doing that unless you attach both first round.
Because they're the Lakers. And
right.
The NBA only exists to help the Lakers.
That's right. Yeah, which has worked out so well for them, other than the one Mickey Mouse year. That's right.
All right, that's a great place to end it. Bryan, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. This was much longer than I expected, but I had a great time talking with you. I think next time that you come back onto the podcast, I'm putting this out into the universe. Doc Rivers is not the Sixers head coach anymore. The Sixers, Matisse Thybulle is not on the team anymore, and I have been freed from that. And we upgrade his spot with a legit rotation player. And at 23, we get like someone that I really want in the draft, like EJ Liddell. And then the Sixers have competent wings, and the team is looking great going into next year without Doc Rivers as coach. Prayers up.
Let's speak it into existence.
That's it. That's it, baby. We're speaking it into existence. All right. Thanks, bud. I'll talk to you later.
Of course. Anytime.
Peace.